Hello, UCC. Welcome back. Sorry about the delay. We're having some technical adventures this evening. Of course, we're joined as always by Ivan Bowman, who is our technical genie. And this evening, I'm also joined by Dr. Emily Hill. Hi, Dr. Hill. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us tonight. I know that you have a lot on your plate these days.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm excited to be here.
Good, good. So Emily, I've been doing sort of a pattern with these interviews, but because we know each other so well, we might deviate slightly. But
Oh no,
first,
I studied the other ones.
no deviation. Follow the protocol. First off, could you tell the members of the church and others who are joining in what your role is currently at UCC, and then also what else do you do in your life, because you are quite involved here in Cincinnati in ministry and other things?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm on the lead team at UCC and also on the preaching team. So this will be my first Sunday preaching at UCC, and I also work for InterVarsity. So that's my full-time job. I do campus ministry, specifically with graduate students at University of Cincinnati. So we work, kind of typical campus ministry stuff, but with the graduate students, we're really trying to help think about how faith and research and the sort of academic vocation intersects with our Christian vocation. And so I find that sort of faith and work intersection really interesting. So that's kind of what I do for my full-time job.
Good. Actually, well, Emily, you're not just on lead team and on our preaching roster. You have other involvements at UCC, extending back a couple of years now. Can you elaborate on some of the ways that you've been involved at University Christian Church?
Yeah, so I have also, before I was on the lead team, I have been involved with the Justice Group. I've also been on the worship team, playing the piano and stuff as well. So yeah, the last year I was, the last year or so I was really involved with the Justice Group as well. So yeah.
Excellent. And how long have you been on lead team? When did you join us?
I joined the lead team in May. So this is my first year on the lead team.
Yeah. Okay. And all of us are on a commission as sort of that, that gives us an area of expertise on the lead team. What is yours?
So I am on the Great Commission, which is focused on discipleship and spiritual formation. So I'm trying to think about how do we equip people in the church to be disciples and to help other people be disciples within the church.
Fantastic. Thanks for elaborating on that.
Yeah.
Emily, could you tell us a little bit about your spiritual biography? What were your young years like? When did you decide to become a believer? What did that look like? And what was sort of your upbringing in religion and spirituality, if you had any?
Yeah. So I definitely did grow up in the church. I've been going to church my whole life. And so, I became a Christian. I guess I was baptized when I was 7. And I think I really did sort of, I did understand what that meant at the time. I liked last week what Kent said. I think that, when he was younger or when we're younger and the faith, it kind of is about, kind of learning to do the right things and not the wrong things. And I think that's definitely how I understood it, when I was younger. I think it was really when I went to college that my faith became my own. And so really since then, and it was really even in college, that began to sort of series of, I guess I would call them different little epiphanies or crises over time that just really my faith changed or developed over time, so that it became less about things you do or don't do and much more about who I was and how I lived in the world. So that could become a really long story, so I'll stop there for now.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, so we'll dip back into that if that seems to illuminate some of the future questions, but you can pick to be as long or short in your answers as you'd like.
Okay.
Within reason. So you went to college to study what, and where did you go?
So I went to Miami University and studied economics. So I studied economics. I got an undergrad and master's in economics, and I spent 10 years working in the corporate world, doing marketing research consulting. And so that was my first life.
Okay.
And then I would say one of those epiphanies and crises is how I ended up in my second life where I am now. So,
okay.
A sort of conversion of sorts to get me here. I guess I can go into that a little bit. I think
you should, yeah.
Yeah. I knew, I guess for a number of years that I was feeling like I was not going to stay in the corporate world forever. I was feeling like just in various ways disillusioned or just I didn't want to stay in the corporate world forever. Mm-hmm. But I had no idea really exactly what I was going to do. I was increasingly interested in social justice. I was doing some nonprofit work. I started a little side social enterprise business that was kind of a hobby that I was doing. I was on the board for some nonprofits. But I didn't really know how I was going to get out of the corporate world. And so I never expected that I would go back to school. That was never really on the radar. But I was at a conference, and the Justice Conference is what it was called. And I heard about this degree that was a master's in social justice. And I was like, oh, these sound like classes I would actually want to study for again and write papers for. And so that was really basically within a matter of a couple weeks, I knew that I was going to quit my career and move across the country to go back to school. And that was really one of the most clear things that God has ever, communicated to me, I think. So that led to a sort of identity crisis, I guess, because I didn't really realize, as that degree was basically a combination of history and issues and theology. And so as I was sort of studying all of these things, I had basically gone backwards in terms of, what you're kind of supposed to do. I had been a sort of successful career person, and it sounds kind of silly to say it out loud. I still feel That's like okay. that. But, and then I had been moving up the corporate ladder and all of these things. And then I basically went backwards according to what a lot of the cultural narratives tell you. And I never really expected it, but I felt that. I felt the lack of those sort of things that the world had told me mattered. And I never really agreed to that. I never intellectually said that those things mattered. As a good Christian, I would never have said that. And then all of a sudden, I didn't have those things anymore. And I realized that, oh, they had actually mattered to me. So it was this whole realization that, that my faith was actually very American, and that it had been very affected by the American dream and all of these things. And so, I was that was all happening while I was studying theology. And I fell in love with theology and decided to go get a PhD in theology. And that really that whole experience really shaped the kinds of things that I like to look at and study in theology, and why I'm interested in ministry and what difference God makes in our lives.
Okay, so what do you like to study in theology, and where did you do your degree?
I was studying in Scotland. I was in Aberdeen, the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, and I studied theological ethics. So I studied basically economics, the intersection of economics and theology. And I'm generally interested in how systems and cultural ideas form us without, in general, and often without our knowledge. So, like I was saying, I didn't know that that all of these ideas in America and in our culture were shaping how I understood myself and even how I understood God. And so I'm generally really interested in how ideas like that shape how we understand what it means to be human, how we understand how we interact with people, how we understand God, and the way we think it means to be a Christian, and especially in America. So, and I really like that, to think about that from an economics perspective, but there's obviously lots of things that includes. So,
okay. What was the name of your dissertation? Do you remember?
Yes, my dissertation focused on marketing because I used to work in marketing. So it was called Living and Active: Marketing and the Word of God for You. So it was a critical theology of marketing.
Oh, wow. Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. So you've been formed by a number of different external and internal factors that have brought you into, I think you called this your second life.
Yeah.
And part of that now has included ministering to graduate students, but also in very real ways ministering to the congregation of UCC. And I will say, as a fellow member of the lead team, ministering to the fellow lead team members. So thank you for that. Could you give us maybe a little bit of do you have a philosophy about what the church ought to be? What ought the church to be? And I guess I'm very conscious of the historic moment in which we are speaking this, the day after what is being credibly called an attempted insurrection on the Capitol, even by people waving flags that say Jesus saves, which we could say there's one idea of what the church is supposed to be. But what do you say, Emily Hill? What is the church supposed to be? Who is she?
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think that I really like the passages in 2 Corinthians where Paul talks about how Christ has accomplished reconciliation of all things, and that the church has been given the ministry of reconciliation. And so I think that is what the church should be. And there are a lot of ways that we can think about what that means. And that can be, I don't mean that as a sort of cheap reconciliation. I think that reconciliation includes reconciliation between ourselves and God, between ourselves and each other, between ourselves and creation. And that is a very holistic reconciliation. And so if you trace that idea of reconciliation, throughout Scripture, it is very holistic. And so it is not a cheap, reconciliation that doesn't take into account, that does not take into account injustices. We don't just sweep things under the rug and try to all get along. And so I think that's the difficult, position that we find ourselves in now. How do we, in this very polarized environment where, of course, we do not, where we denounce, nationalism and white supremacy and any form of Christianity that, is on board with those kinds of things. And how do we also, try to work for reconciliation? But that reconciliation is not only, between believers, but I think we don't also want to settle for polarization. So yes, I think that the church should be ambassador of reconciliation.
That was, I really kind of pitched you a fastball there, Emily. Thank you for wrestling with that. The truth is I knew you could handle it, and Marty and Kent and Megan couldn't hack it. So I asked you. No, it came to me because of the nature of our conversation. Can you tell us a little bit, can you just sort of prep us maybe for what we can be thinking about coming into your sermon this Sunday? Are any of these themes connected to what you're going to be saying on Sunday?
Yeah. Well, we're starting a sermon series on Epiphany. And I know, I didn't grow up in a church that followed the church calendar. So I know, if you grew up in a non-denominational church, for example, you probably did not celebrate Epiphany. So actually yesterday was Epiphany. And there's a lot of, if you follow theologians on Twitter, which surprisingly I do, I know, shocker. There's
Who, you?
I know, but Epiphany is about the revelation of Christ, and the revelation of Christ as King, and the revelation of all of what Jesus reveals to us. And it also reveals other things. And so obviously we saw a lot of other things revealed yesterday. So I think it revealed our idols as well. But so we're beginning a series on Epiphany, and this, so I'll kind of just briefly explain what Epiphany is and what people can expect in the other sermon series, or other sermons that follow. But this Sunday we'll be looking at Jesus' baptism and what that means when Jesus is baptized in the wilderness. And we can be thinking about what it means that Jesus is King. Okay. In a non airy-fairy sort of way.
Excellent. Emily, I think you're the second member of the lead team that I've interviewed in this capacity. And I think that this might be a nice moment just to address the congregation, because you and I and Megan and Sim and Derek and Sarah have been at the helm of some pretty big changes at UCC. And we've been working together for quite a while, but the congregation has received some of these revelations and epiphanies later than we did. And for some that's felt, there's a feeling of not being, in control or being surprised. And I'm wondering if, and I think it might be helpful, even though we've tried to be open and honest and those kinds of things, I think it would be helpful for the congregation to know what is your vision and hope for this specific incarnation of the church. We've talked more generally. Who are you as a member of the lead team when you're making decisions about, this transitional moment that we're in? What is it that you want to see birthed into life at UCC?
Good question. Yeah, well, I mean, you kind of asked me what I think that the church should be, or what the church is. And so when I think about the church, making kingdom leaders or making disciples, I think of that as, making ambassadors of reconciliation and in all spheres of our life. And so I'd really like to, and so I really do think of that, just based on my background, I mostly thinking of that in sort of all the ways in which we can try to equip people to do that in different areas of discipleship and groups, and how can we try to add a little bit more structure to that, to create some more, I guess, let's say like on-ramps to that, so that if somebody comes, they can see sort of clearly how to participate in some of that, and kind of know what we're about in some of that. And then also, though, that can spin off in a lot of different ways. And, not everybody does that there are, everybody has different, everybody's in different sort of phases of life, different jobs, different vocations. So, how can students do that? How can adults, how can parents, how can professors, how can anybody sort of do that? And how can you embody that in your community? So that could, there can be lots of on-ramps and lots of off-ramps, and how can we just equip people to be ambassadors of reconciliation, as ways of, so just more holistic, a little bit more structure to that discipleship, I guess, is something that I would like to see.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me invoke the spirit of Ivan Bowman here to see if we are at a moment when we have questions from our audience. Otherwise, I'm going to start asking Emily about novels and which hiking shoes I should buy for my next big outing. Ivan, are you there?
Yes, I am there, in fact.
Okay.
We do have a few questions. Megan asked, how do I get to become a doctor like Emily?
Well, I don't know if you want to put yourself through that. Yeah, well, is that a serious question? You spend a lot of hours by yourself. So yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, I guess lots of years of research and sitting in a classroom by yourself, and or not sitting in a classroom, sitting in an office reading and writing by yourself. And so I wouldn't not do it again, but I wouldn't do it again. So yeah.
Sarah asks, tell us about Emily on her free time, favorite ice cream, beer, etc.
Let's see, favorite ice cream. I like the Grater's chocolate chip. So the more chocolate, the better. My favorite beer. One of my favorite beers is the so Brewdog is this is a little interesting tidbit that connects Scotland and Cincinnati, or Scotland and Ohio anyway. So Brewdog is a craft beer place that was started in Aberdeen, Scotland, where I went to school, and their US headquarters are in Columbus, Ohio. So, that's a fun little tidbit, kind of random. And they have a Elvis juice, which is a citrus IPA that I like. I also like to bake a lot, and I like to play with my nephew, Caleb, who's almost 4. So yeah, I like to have fires with my friends, since that's about what we can do right now.
and there's a little creature that shares your home.
Yes, I have a cat. He is asleep right down here next to my heater, named Bartlett, or Jed Bartlett from the West Wing.
We have another question from Megan. Emily, can you say more about your passion for campus ministry?
Yeah. So I'm the one thing that was really striking to me about the InterVarsity's work with graduate students was that they really did have this focus on faith, integrating faith and academic life, and thinking about how we can, if you heard me talking about being interested in theology and economics and how these systems form us, and how we can be disciples in every area of our life, that's really what I'm interested in thinking about in campus ministry, is how can, Katie, who's a historian, how does her faith inform her life as a historian, and how does being a historian inform her faith, and what does it look like to help equip her to be a Christian in the academy, and how can we as Christians make a lasting impact for the kingdom by our work specifically in the academy. So a lot of, you could either think about the academy as being, or the university as being this place that has sort of all these bad ideas that we need to fix, or we can think about it as having a lot of good ideas that we can work through. And so how can we work through these systems and also, restore the systems that are there by being a Christian presence. And so, trying to help people specifically as they think about what their vocation is going to be. How can they be equipped as Christians to live as Christians in whatever they're going to be, and not kind of keep their faith at one, sort of silo, and whatever their job or their profession is in this other silo. And that really excites me because, that's pretty much how we tend to live. And I lived that way for a long time, and I wish somebody would have helped me, answer that question. And it's not like there's one answer to that question, but I like to wrestle with it. So.
Good. Ivan, do we have more?
Yep. Megan asks, who have been some of your most influential spiritual guides / teachers?
Yes, this question has been asked before, so I was trying to think about it. I can think of, theologians that I've read that I really enjoy or have been really impactful to me. So one is William Kavanaugh, who's a Catholic theologian who really changed my thinking in a lot of ways. Same with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who's obviously a fairly famous theologian. Willie Jennings is a theologian that I'm reading a lot of now that I talk about a lot. So those are some theologians that I am impacted by recently. I tend to be a person who's like, whatever I read recently is whatever is like, what I think about a lot. So to think about, there's some other ones, but.
Great. Ivan, do we have any more questions from the Peanut Gallery?
In fact, we do. There's one from Christine of, how did you choose UCC as your home church, and what was your first impression of the church?
Yeah, I would say there's two reasons why I first started. Well, the few reasons why I first started going to UCC. When I moved back to Cincinnati, I was looking for a church, and I guess I grew up in the movement or sort of family of churches called the Restoration Movement, which UCC is technically a part of. And I guess I feel like I generally don't know where I fit in a lot of in churches in general, but I knew that UCC was one of those churches, but the only one that I would one of the only ones I would consider going to still, because they allow women in leadership and to preach, which is not necessarily something I specifically thought that I would do there, but just like in principle would only go to a church that allowed that. And I knew that they were known for being active or talking about social justice, and not a lot of churches in that group of churches do. And so those were two things that were really important to me. And without having to kind of go to like a whole nother set of churches or denomination or traditions where I had to kind of like learn something all over again. So that's why I initially went. And so I was also really struck then when I came by just the combination of everything that was going on there, the ability for the space to hold a lot of tensions, and you kind of had this contemplative space, some liturgical and traditional elements, it felt like a place where, people could ask questions. You didn't have to have a specific answer or fit into a certain theological category, which was important for me. So yeah, that's why I went there.
What's next, Ivan?
The next question is, Sarah wants to know, did you find a large difference between church life in Scotland and here in Ohio? And did you get to travel throughout Europe?
Yeah, so I did not travel as much when I lived in Scotland because I was a student and did not have a lot of money. I traveled a decent amount around, some around Scotland. I actually lived in the UK once before in my first life that I mentioned when I was doing corporate work. So I had a little bit more money at the time, and I did travel around Europe a lot then. So I love Europe. Yeah, I lived in London at that time, and so London is one of my favorite cities. There is a big difference in church life between, I'll just pinpoint it to when I was living in Scotland and Ohio. There were some, I guess, kind of like more evangelical churches in Scotland and Aberdeen where I was living. Most of them did not. I visited them and they just did not kind of feel right to me. Some of them didn't allow women in leadership and some other things. And I was kind of going through a whole crisis about that at the time. So I was just like, I couldn't go there. And so I actually went to a big cathedral, a Scottish Episcopal church. And it was, that was a whole just different experience. So yes, it was a much older congregation, high church, Anglican. So that was just obviously my own experience there. But it was a little bit rough trying to find a place to go there. So yeah.
We don't have any more questions for now, but
okay,
you can either wrap up or ask a novel question or whatever you're saying.
I will ask a fun question and then we will wrap up. Emily, you were an avid reader growing up, I believe. Were there any heroines from books that you read growing up, any female protagonists that you especially, with whom you especially identified or idolized, or that have traveled with you in your imaginary life to adulthood?
That's a very specific question.
I suppose if there were male characters, you can include those too. We were talking about a specific book series right before we started.
Right. Yeah. Well, no, we were talking about Anne of Green Gables. So I do love Anne of Green Gables. So I said it's very specific because I'm like not sure if she would like qualify sort of for all those things that you all those different descriptors.
All those
like all, whether I identified with her or idolized her or things like that. But I love those books. I reread them actually the summer before I moved to Scotland, and I was struck by like her imagination and I don't know. I still really love her. And I do not like Anne with an E on Netflix, just to, I only watched 2 episodes, but I turned it off.
Hot take.
Yeah.
You heard it here.
Not the same. Significantly darker, and there was things added in that were not in the book. And so, which, I mean, there's a lot of things that are, you know, like that in TV series and stuff, but they modified significant plot points. So not a fan. I guess I'm an Anne of Green Gables purist, so.
Okay.
Apparently.
Do you have any last thoughts with which you want to leave the congregation before we sign off? Anything you want them to know, or anything you would like to say?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. I feel like I should come up with something profound, but
no,
I think I'm okay. Yeah.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you, Emily, so much for joining us. Thank you, Ivan, for all the hard work that we know that you do to make this happen, and especially putting out fires and bridging gaps in technology. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and everyone who is watching this after the fact. And just a reminder to sign up if you are coming on Sunday. It just helps us prepare. We will not turn you away at the door, but it's just a way that helps us make decisions about safety and those kinds of things. So thank you again. And we're going to say good evening for now. Bye.
See you later.
Bye.